Thank you all for being here. First and foremost, I have to tell you, I've been in your shoes so many times, and I mean, even to this day, I still am when I'm looking at things that are potentially helpful to me and webinars and stuff like that. And your time is so valuable. So I appreciate that you've dedicated some of it to this topic, which honestly, to me, is one of the most important topics that we could be exploring. So let's get into it. So first and foremost, my name's Sam Priddy. It's said like ETTY, but it looks like IDDY. And it's not going to offend me. I've been called that for years. So Sam Priddy. And I've been with Tableau now since 2014. So it's been a while. When I started out, for me, really what it was is that I tried Tableau and I was just like, man, this is unreal how much better this is than what I'm using. And, you know, a little bit of background too, I didn't come from a data and analytics background. So my degree's in graphic design. I went to school thinking that I was going to be some sort of artist, maybe a comic book artist or something like that. And as it turns out, there's not as much money in that as I thought there was, especially back when I got out of college, which was a while ago now. And just followed opportunity, which led me here. And a lot of it, again, just came down to how amazing it was. And it just drastically changed my life when I found it. I did 2 years in sales. I'm not a salesperson. So that was, as you can imagine, a little bit challenging. But after 2 years, I thought I was done. I was like, I can't do this anymore. But a friend of mine on our training team was like, hey, you should come and train. So for about 4 years, I joined our training team and I traveled the world teaching people how to use Tableau. And one of the things that became glaringly apparent while I was out there was that people could pick up Tableau, but there was this massive gap between like doing the clicks and then understanding why we're doing those clicks and what that meant from a data literacy perspective. So for me, there was this really strong pull to move into that type of role. And then I ended up with an opportunity to move over to our marketing team, which actually covers a lot of that content. So in 2019, I switched over, did audience messaging and strategy for a couple of years. And really the point of that for me was, I want to make sure that we're actually conveying things that are useful to people that can use it. So that was the impetus behind the move. And then at about 2 years into that, when my ex-boss on the training team came back to me and said, hey, we're going to do this program that's all about teaching people data skills for free. Do you want to join? And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is like the culmination of all those things that I wanted to do. So needless to say, here I am. We started this in 2022, and a couple years later, we're still going and hoping to help more people gain some data literacy and some data skills along the way. I put my Tableau Public and LinkedIn on there if you guys are interested in seeing me or connecting. Either one is fine. Full disclosure, I'm not great at checking messages on LinkedIn. I try, but it's a little overwhelming to me. But feel free to reach out there if you'd like. So we'll cover a few things today. We've actually got 5 topics. I know that may not sound like a lot, but in our time, it will be a lot. So the first thing is just talking about what data literacy means. This to me is a real hot button. And even just the term literacy or data literacy. So the second thing is asking good questions. The third being terms that you should know. And really the idea here is that there's going to be way more than I'll cover in this period of time. So this is going to be pretty high level. I'll cover a few things, but this is going to be a series and things are going to keep going. So check out in the Data Fam Discovery Kit, and then also on our social channels where we're going to continue to build some of this content out for you all. We'll talk about how data is collected, and then last, where data is stored. And a lot of these things, again, are like, it's terms or things you hear thrown around, and we want to make sure it's clear and understood. So what is data literacy, and why do I like stories? So full disclosure here, I love stories. And it's not like I go out and write stories. It's more that for me, when it comes down to learning, stories are one of the quickest ways to convey a topic or to help break down a complex topic and make it really approachable. So for me, that's a big part of it. If you hate stories, you might be a little uncomfortable for the next half hour, 45 minutes. I apologize for that ahead of time. So what is data literacy, right? First of all, I hate rhetorical questions. So when I do that, know that I'm cringing inside. Data literacy, our definition is the ability to explore, understand, and communicate with data. Right? Pretty straightforward. Explore, understand, and communicate. We're trying to cover kind of all the things that data literacy might mean. The big sticking point for me is that most of the time people think they either are or they're not. And I would disagree with that wholeheartedly. I think it's a range, right? From the time that we are, and jokingly here, a newborn, right? A new data user, all the way up to data scientist, all these people land on the spectrum. And that doesn't mean that one is or is not data literate, right? We just think about regular literacy from like reading. I don't read at the level of like a lawyer or a judge or something, but I'm still literate, right? And that's the same thing here. You don't need to be a data scientist to be data literate. It's appropriate to have the right amount for where you are. All right, so we're going to dive in here. And I think one of the first things that's really important with this is asking questions and being really good at asking questions. So again, stories, right? So when we were kids, think about this, and maybe you are a kid still. If you are a kid and you're on this, good for you. But back to when we were kids, like it used to happen all the time where someone would say something to you, and if you just took it at face value, you were gullible, right? People gave you such a hard time about that. I remember the old joke where people would be like, "Do you want a piece of gum?" And I'd be like, "Yeah," and they'd be like, "So do I." Ha, ha, ha. And like things like that, where it's just like it would suck you in. And it's like you were reliant on being able to ask good questions when you were a kid. Like when someone would do something like that, you were immediately like, "Give me more details. Help me understand what you mean." And at some point, as adults, we just stopped asking. And I don't know why that is. To be honest, it's crazy to me. But we did. We just started taking things at face value. So asking questions constantly, and that's not rude, right? It's just giving more context. So the first thing here is, what is a good question? And for that, it's really a question that's going to lead to more information. I have a 13-year-old right now, and when he gets home from school, if I say, "Did you have a good day?" I'm sure you can guess the answer is, "Yep." Right? There's nothing there. But if I want to know more, it's got to be open-ended and digging so that it takes me into that. So it's like, what was good today? Right? He can't answer that with a yes or no. Oh, school was good. Well, what was good about school? Right? And it's like using those kind of questions that are going to prompt more response and more thought, right? It can't be automated at that point. So staying away from closed-ended questions. These things give us context to make more informed decisions. Now, I remember in one of my roles, my boss always used to talk about analysis paralysis, and that is absolutely real, right? We get so much information that it can be overwhelming, but you get enough to give you the right context to make an informed decision, which is great from a number of reasons. Obviously, your decision will be good, but it's also great from a career perspective where that will be your reputation of making these decisions that are based on that information, and good decisions beget more good decisions, which begets more success, right? All right, so I cannot eat gluten or dairy. I'm sure there's a bunch of you guys that have, similar food things. And if you don't, oh my gosh, I'm so jealous. I just can't, unfortunately. They give me migraines and all sorts of other stuff. It's not great. I also can't eat chocolate, which is also a bummer. So that combination makes it really tough to eat. But I have really caring friends. Like my friends are wonderful, right? And they're constantly like, "Oh my gosh, here's this new thing that you should go try. Here's this food you should try." And it's safe, right? And that's what everybody always wants to tell me is that I found this thing you can eat. But the truth of it is that if I take that at face value, I'm getting migraines constantly. I feel uncomfortable constantly. And it's because they don't necessarily have the context that I would get by asking those questions. So when I'm told that, my first response is to ask more questions, right? Get more information about this thing so that I know that I'm safe. Even restaurants, they're trying as hard as they can, but some of their components are pre-made and they don't necessarily know, right? So for me, it's always asking that next question just to be sure. So there's I guess, a technique called the 5 whys. And if you're not familiar with that, I would say give it a quick look by Sakichi Toyota, hence Toyota, right? And the whole idea of this, we're thinking about asking good questions, is looking for that root cause. Now, what I've seen is people saying, "Oh my gosh, that's just a blame game. You want to point at someone." And I'm like, no, not at all. Like, it's not the person, it's the system, right? Because we are all working through that system. And we use those 5 whys. It's like when something goes wrong or something's different, it's like, well, why was it different? Well, it didn't happen like this. Well, why didn't it happen like this? Well, because this thing happened. Well, why did that thing happen? And eventually we're going to get to a point where we're either satisfied with the answer that's given us enough to actually adjust, or our data's exhausted and we've gone as far as we can go. Either way, that's gotten us to a point where we have more information that we can actually use to make that decision or to alter the thing to make it better. One of the things, though, that always stands out to me that I think a lot of people forget is that it's easy to start going down that and start rabbit holing off to the sides. And pardon me, and then we lose our original question. Like, why was I even looking in the first place? So keep coming back to that, right? Why am I doing this? It's the same thing with a talk like this, right? Why am I telling you these things? Well, this is about asking good questions. And these are techniques and things you can do to make sure that your questions are relevant. So this isn't just something that works in only one place. So there's a few places, though, that I want to show this. And I'm going to show you guys a dashboard here real quick. And I've included this link, the link to this in the deck. And I'm going to, the deck will be shared with you guys too. So you can go check this out later if you'd like. And this is in a dashboard. This is one of those places where we should be asking questions. So I find myself often, well, not often actually these days, but at some points, my wife and I or kids are sitting on the couch and we're thinking like, I want to watch a show. What should we watch? And if you guys have ever been stuck in this loop, you know that it can be like an hour before you actually find a show. It's frustrating. And sometimes you search so long, you don't find anything. So I made this dashboard based on the Data Plus TV data set that's available on Tableau Public. If you haven't found that yet, just Google it, it'll pop right up. And what I wanted to do is create a finder so that we could get our way to a show in a quick way, right? And this is all about asking questions as we work through this. What genre do I want to see, right? So if you think about a dashboard, filters are one of those ways to ask questions. It's a way for me to narrow it down. In this case, I chose sport, and then I clicked apply, and that's going to narrow down the field. Once it refreshes here, that's going to narrow down the field to only the things that are in that area that are around sport, right? Then we also have things like actions. So when I'm clicking on something in the dashboard, that's asking a question too. It's saying, okay, can you tell me more about this thing? Give me more insight, right? And the dashboard has a lot of that. And the interactivity is a huge piece of it. Clicking, hovering, doing view data if that's a possibility. Those are all ways that we can ask questions of our dashboard. Never assume that it is at face value. So dashboards aren't the only way though. So when we're thinking about this, again, asking great questions, right? I'm going to share a new tab. A lot of times we find ourselves looking through an article or something that we think is really insightful. I mean, we're just clobbered with this stuff these days. Like this one, 5 ways to grow business value through analytics. And this starts rattling off, percentages and, we're getting numbers here and all this stuff that's basically like guiding us through this information, which is wonderful. I'm a huge proponent of more data than less data. However, that said, I want to be able to know more about this. Remember those 5 whys. Where did they get this? Who did they pull? Where did that come from? So that I can use this information to be more effective in my communication. So when we look at this, what we're looking for typically is a call out for where they pull these stats from. So as I'm scrolling through this, we'll notice that as I get down farther and I get down here to the bottom, here's a call out to where this came from, right? So this is first layer. It's giving me the information. I'm educated with that information, which is great, but I want to dig farther. So this how data culture fuels business value in data-driven organizations is the study. And I can see that it was sponsored by Tableau and it was a white paper. So if I click on that, it's going to take me to a place where I can get to this white paper. And now I'm a level deeper, right? And I can go through this white paper and understand how some of this stuff happened. And this is actually going to list out too, most of these should, if you dig far enough, list out their methodology. So now I know that this is 1,100 respondents. Some of the organizations were big, and it's giving me more information, right? Again, it's giving me enough context to make educated choices, or so that when I go back to my work, that I'm passing on information that's based in fact. The last thing I want to do is go back and tell someone they should pay attention to something I'm doing without having done my research. So the last piece of this here is thinking about in the office. First, you guys are getting asked for a lot of this kind of stuff for data constantly. And one of the first things I tell people is get context. What are they trying to do? What are they hoping to get out of it? What's the whole picture, right? Because if you don't know that, you're going to give back results that are a microcosm of what they're trying to do. Timeline is critical. When do you need this by? When is it due? When do you actually have to present it? What's the priority? Should I put this in front of my other work? These are all great questions, right? That give you, again, more information to provide the best thing possible. What's the format, right? Now, one of the other pieces of this, and you'll see a lot of this, and a lot of this too, sorry, I didn't mention that at the beginning, is basing this on the structure in our trailhead content. And I'll list that out at the end. But one of the things that's called out in there, which I wholeheartedly agree with, is be prepared to be either wrong or to find unexpected results. It's not always as straightforward as you would assume. And we need to be okay with that, right? Sometimes our gut can be challenged and it's like, okay, my intuition was this, but it wasn't that. So now I'm going to accept that and move on. All right, speaking the lingo to be in the know. So last year around this time, my son started playing lacrosse for the first time. If you've never played before, I hadn't. And there were a ton of words I didn't know. And they were throwing them out. The coaches were throwing them out like we all should know exactly what they were talking about. I was just like, I don't know what you're saying. It was confusing, a little bit frustrating and embarrassing. And if you think about that, let's translate that back to the office, right? All domains have specific jargon. Analytics does too. And it's really important for us that, one, we start to understand what those mean, but then we become the people that are removing that gate. Let's get rid of gatekeeping and help these become conversations and words that everybody can understand. Now, I'm going to go over a couple terms here that are not all the way down at the microcosm level. In other words, you can get a lot more precise as you get into these. For me, I feel like as you dig into the journey, it's good to get kind of this high level understanding and to hone in your understanding as you go, right? As you become a data scientist, you're going to have a much more specific way of describing this than I am right now. So the first one, I'm calling it out as population here, but in our trailhead content, you'll see it's called out as set of items. And the only reason I don't lean on that is just because a set means something specific in Tableau, even though that is a proper definition. But it's a population, right? It's this group of things, or a collection of things that we're exploring. Now, I always thought that every time someone said population, I thought they meant people. I was like, oh my gosh, they're talking about people. But in those meetings, I was like, that feels out of context. We're not talking about people. But it could be anything, right? And it's the group of things or the collection of things that you're exploring. So a pile of screws, it could be food in your cupboard, it could be representatives in a call center. The population is important for us to understand because it gives us context for the situation. Now, a few weeks back, and I apologize for talking so fast. I'm sorry, I get excited about this. I was shopping for a shoulder rest for my daughter's violin. She just started playing violin. And I'm sure you guys have all been on to the large online retailer that you can buy things from. And I was looking at all the results, and that was first and foremost, the results were my population, right? This is the collection of things that I want to analyze. And when I looked at those results, then I was like, okay, the only way for me to really narrow this is obviously going to be price, or then looking at, the stars, so the reviews, and then the number of reviews. And it's almost like these are like subpopulations within, right? Where I'm saying, okay, all of these that came through my search results are my population. Then I find, one, and I'm looking at that one and I'm like, okay, well, I'm comparing, I guess not one yet, between the few, looking at the stars and the number of those. And that's really critical for me. Again, context, right? If it has 5 stars but 2 reviews, that's way less helpful than 5 stars and 1,200 reviews, right? That's weighted different at that point. So it's much, much more important for me to find that right one. And that's the same thing here, right? The population is giving me context. The population in my collection of items, knowing that helped me understand the decision. So when I look at that and I see the results, there's 30 shoulder rests. And within those shoulder rests, there's 5 that have 5 stars. Within those 5, there's 2 that have over 1,000 ratings, right? I'm using that to help me make the best decision. So in a dashboard, similar thing, go back to my dashboard here real quick. You notice that as I was filtering down, so when I chose sport and we adjust our ratings, that it's going to give me the population for what I'm looking at now. So within sport, for things that are rated 8.5 to 10, there's 288 of them. So that's the group I'm looking at now, right? So it's narrowed that window for me. Similarly, as I'm looking at these ratings for the shows or the series, I can see how many people actually voted on these to get an idea of how valuable this rating actually is. So 9.2 is great, but it's only 295 votes, which is far different than looking at 8.8, but 326,000, right? So again, that population is giving us context, or that collection, understanding that amount is giving us context. So the second term is one of my favorites, actually, and it's called variable. So if you're not familiar with this, we're going to get into it. This is great. So one of my favorite things when I was a kid, especially when we were on road trips, which it's funny because my kids now, everything is technology or phones, so they don't have to dig into stuff like this. But when I was a kid, one of my favorite things was these things called Mad Libs. And if you've never done a Mad Lib before, they are fantastic. And I'm going to go back into an example here real quick. But Mad Libs essentially were this game where it had a bunch of blanks, and the blanks directed you, though, as to what you were supposed to fill in to fill out the story. So it'd be like an adjective or a noun, a plural noun, or a game in this case. And that variable was, in this case, the adjective. And the definition for a variable is just a measurement, property, or characteristic of something that can vary or change. And in this case, these could be anything, but they're still adjectives, right? So they're still directed, but it can change what it is. And it also dramatically changes what the story is about. Now, another example that's a little more work focused would be like a mail merge, right? If you think about a mail merge or direct mail, or it says like, hi, Sam Priddy, here's this offer of 10%. Well, the mail merge would say, hi, name, here's this offer of blank percent. And all we're doing is filling in those variables. Now, it doesn't have to be just the two that I just listed, which were both a little more qualitative, right? It could be a measurement also, right? So in the one on the right here, we're looking at series of releases by year, and we can see that number, that measurement is going to be our variable. Now, there's two types. Whoop, I got a little excited. There's two types. There's qualitative variables and quantitative variables. And those two types, the first one, qualitative, is going to be characteristics, like what color are my shoes? Am I wearing a hat? What state do I live in? Things like that. Quantitative things, quantitative variables are going to be measurements. So height, number of items sold, miles ridden on your bicycle, things like that. Both variables, though. And that's really important because as we're analyzing, variables become a huge part of that. All right, now for all that data that we're talking about, analyzing or looking at, where does that come from? Now, when I grew up, again, this is a while ago, but for me, anytime someone said data, it meant like spreadsheets, big numbers, scary stuff. It was just so far out of my league that to me, it was like, it almost like blanked out. It was just too much. I couldn't comprehend it. And it's funny because I was talking to my sister-in-law the other night, and I was talking to her about data, and it was similar, right? Where she was like, yeah, I'm not really, I know you do it, but that's not me. But she's a teacher. And I started asking her, like, do you look at like how your students are doing? Are you looking at, how the projects went or how many hours in a day you're teaching or any of that kind of stuff? And she's like, well, yeah, and all of that. And I was like, then you're working with data, right? That's all data. And she's like, oh my gosh, you're right. And when we think about that to today, though, literally data is in everything. And this is really critical for people to think about. Like literally any and everything that we're doing is generating data, right? So it's collected or observed information when we think about what data is. Now, there's probably better definitions or other definitions out there. I'm not going to say that's the one and only, but it's literally things that are generated or observations or events that are generated when anything does or doesn't happen, right? Doesn't is just as effective. I always think of this movie that came out in 2006 called Stranger Than Fiction. It was with Will Ferrell. I know not a lot of people are kind of polarized on the Will Ferrell spectrum, but this was an interesting one. It wasn't as typical. And it was all about like literally everything that was happening was being narrated in his life. And I think about that because of all the things that we engage with, whether it's our phone or TV or whatever, it's all generating data in the background that's being collected. And it just depends on what that observer or that person that's recording it is trying to get, right? Sometimes it's marketing. Sometimes it's just information about the audience. Sometimes they're trying to sell stuff, right? But it's all there. Now, when it comes to collecting it, though, there are a number of ways to do this. And it doesn't always have to be like on your computer, right? And I think everybody always assumes that it's like this big, I think of the computers in the 80s were these massive boxes, right? Or maybe that's 70s. But it can literally be you just writing down information, right? It's writing down information. It's, maybe it's a grocery list and how many of each item. That's data collection, right? It can be by hand digitally where you're filling into a spreadsheet. It can be machine generated. So think of like cash registers, point of sale systems, things like that, or surveys, or application generated. So how often are you on the internet and you go to a web page and it says, we use cookies, and you have to set, like your preferences for what that is, or just accept all and let them, mark it to your email for the next 10 years. Sometimes that's web scraping or keystroke recording, or, it used to even be video location recording that we would do in retail stores I worked at, where we would track how long people stood at certain locations around the store. Now, the reason I talk about it is that collection is what determines what we can do with it later. It also determines whether or not it's accurate or standardized. Now, when I used to work, again, in that retail store, this is a typical thing that happens. And this is important to understand, is that when you're filling in data or doing it by hand, it has to be consistent and standardized for you to be able to analyze in any way, shape, or form. If you look at this example I have, all these variants would be their own separate field or their own separate line. And if I was trying to, pull this all together and summarize, it would be impossible. So I'm telling you this because clean data and being able to standardize is so important, especially if we're doing it by hand. Now, the machine-generated stuff is typically going to be more standardized, but it's important that if you are starting to pull this stuff together, that you think about that. This is a clean version. So the other one was not clean. You can see in this one how there's a lot more standardization and cleanliness in this data. Granted, this one is a sample data set, so it's perfect. Your data probably is never going to be perfect, and that's okay. But just know that as we're thinking about it going forward. So let's see here. So the next thing we're looking at is going into where it's actually stored and why. And I know it feels like we're ripping through stuff, right? I apologize for the speed, but hopefully it's a lot of information. And you'll get this slide, the slide deck later, so you can come back and pull this information out as well. So if you think about your clothes at home, and yes, articles of clothing. So after you do the laundry, the fastest way to put clothes away would literally be to just dump it into a laundry basket and then dump that basket into drawers, right? Just shove it in there. No order, just shove it in. That'd be fast, right? But it would be a huge pain to try to use it later. Like you're trying to find socks, you'd never find the other sock, trying to find the right shirt, you wouldn't be able to find it. It'd be almost impossible. However, it is the fastest way to put it all together. So the better way though, well, not necessarily better, but better for some things would be to take it out of the laundry basket and fold it, right? And then after we fold it, we put it into drawers in a dresser or some sort of thing like that, right? Where we're organizing it. So we're putting it in, the dresser holds all the drawers hold all the individual types of clothing. But with it all in there, it would be hard for us to understand, like, okay, do I need more socks or more jeans, or like, do I have enough outfits? So that's where, if you've ever done this, hopefully you've done it at some point, but we take them out and we lay them out on like, the top of your bed or something flat. I only have a bed that's empty of stuff at the time. So when you put it all out there, you could look at it and say, okay, well, realistically, I have like 4 or 5 outfits. I think that's okay. But it would be hard to know if it was in drawers or in the laundry basket. So why am I telling you about laundry? That's a great question. Because when we think about where we store data, it seems to be kind of similar, a little bit relevant here. So we think about what's called a data lake. I'm sure you've heard this term. This is a term that gets thrown around, I think, a lot lately. The data lake is like your laundry basket. It's all your data in one place. It's raw. It's in the format that it came in. We haven't really done much to organize it. It's just there. It was fast, right? Dumping it in there is fast. It's there. Not a great way to try to have your clothes if you're trying to live through it, right? It's not very, taking stuff in and out kind of sucks. That's where the database comes in, right? So the data lake is all of our raw stuff just coming in, all the stuff together. So audio files, video, spreadsheet, tables, all that kind of stuff, right? The database is going to be more organized, right? So that's our collection of things that have been organized. So we've put them in there in a specific way so that we can have this transactional kind of back and forth and functionally use it. It's like our drawers. Once stuff is folded and in there, it's really easy to take a pair of socks out. So there's two main types there, relational and non-relational. So relational being structured, non-relational being unstructured or semi-structured. So think for relational like MySQL, Postgres, stuff like that. Non-relational like Mongo, Cassandra, things like that. And these are not really for telling a story for humans, right? This is what we need other things to interact with the database to get. Great for transactional though. Now a spreadsheet is going to be like a drawer in that dresser. A spreadsheet's also another name for a table, right? It's an individual thing with columns and rows. And it can be consumed by people. You can organize it in a way that makes that possible. It's just not ideal, right? It's not the ideal way to do that. But it's the single table within that has that information. So we think about this breakdown where data lake is everything raw. Database is more put in a specific way for transactional usage. A spreadsheet is a table, and oftentimes databases have multiple tables. So then the last piece of this would be our data warehouse. In our data warehouse, this is what I was calling the bed, right? So if you're thinking about the image, it's all the stuff out on the bed. And the reason for a data warehouse is that we want to go in and be able to understand our business. And the data warehouse allows us to organize it in a way that we can do this analysis to really understand what's happening. So it's not really a great thing for like transactional information, but it's great for large amount of structured data from multiple places to be able to get an idea of the health of our business. So again, this is not like the exhaustive list of all of them, but I know these terms for me and these things for a while, I was like, I don't really know what that means. And when you're talking about it, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with it. So this is a quick breakdown of what those might look like or what you might run into your organization. All right, so we are believe it or not, at time already. So full circle, we talked about a few things here. So one, which is not on this list actually, which was what is data literacy? And I would encourage you guys that as you're starting this journey, that you give yourself credit for being data literate and for taking the initiative to understand and learn more. It does not have to be where you're not this thing until you get to that point. I mean, this is the thing I do with my kids constantly where they're like, I'm not good enough to call myself that. And it's like, you are. Like you deserve this just as much as they do. Just because you're not at the same level as them doesn't qualify you out. Like you're still relevant and you're still doing this thing. So good on you for that, because it's hard to find time for extras. We talked about asking questions. And I would encourage you guys to think about this from the perspective that it's only going to make things easier for you. And especially from a career perspective, understanding is always going to help you have a leg up on doing things the right way. And that builds trust. And if you're building trust, then people are going to continue to ask you to take farther steps, right? Every opportunity is an opportunity to show how great you can be. And these questions show that you're thinking enough to really get good insight. Get familiar with data terms. I talked about 4 different terms, or 2 terms and then 2 subterms. And I'll do more of these sessions coming up where we discuss more of them. But that's a really big thing, is just understanding what people mean when they say that. If you don't know, let's see, back to the first point, ask questions, right? If somebody uses a term that you're not familiar with, call it out. It's way too easy for people to get stuck in that jargon loop. And you're like, man, I got to go look that up later. Don't look it up later. Ask them, right? What did that mean? What do you mean when you say that? Give me some context. Gain familiarity with where data comes from. This is a big thing because it does determine a lot of what you can do with it. And if you're creating things or you're making things on your own, understanding that will help you understand what you can expect when you get to that point. So it's going to give you a lot more insight into what that looks like. Learn where your data is stored and what you have access to. This is huge, even for us at Tableau, right? Where it's like, okay, what data can I access? Where is it at? What kind of credentials do I need? What can I do with it, right? And if you don't know that, again, it's going to limit you to what kind of insight you can get. Now, I'm not suggesting that you are always there, always in it. And this is what everybody always, when I talk to company leaders, they're like, I don't want people just sitting there staring at data all day. And I'm like, I get it. It's a portion of your job. But if you don't know, it'll take all of your time that you were going to analyze just to find it, right? And sorry, another quick story. It's like when I'm at home and I want to go do a project, I have to go and get out all my stuff. And then a lot of times by the time I've gotten it out, that was all the time I had to do the project. So I have to put it all away and I'm done. So similarly for you, understanding where that is, having the credentials ready, being able to be authorized is going to make it faster so you can actually get in and do that analysis. So what do I do now? Well, practice, right? Incorporate these things into your everyday life. When you see a stat or information in the news, dig into it, right? Learn more about it. Learn more from us. There's the Data Skills webpage, which has self-guided training. We've got guides for enablement. And then share it with others, right? Get this stuff into your vocabulary too. I've tried to learn Spanish for years, and I have learned it to the point where I was quote unquote fluent many times, but then there's never anyone for me to practice with, and it goes away. And it's the same thing with this, right? You have to practice. And I meant to go to the next page, and I would encourage you to register for our next event. So again, these things are so enriching, and it's so great to find people that have the ability to kind of pour into you for what they've learned. And there's going to be a data career panel on November 18th at 11. And this, pardon me. And this is really, it's going to be focused on career journeys using Tableau community and resources. So it's all about sharpening skills, how to stay current, and then how to grow your career with it. And I think it's a huge piece right now as we're in the shifting economy. It's just understanding, all right, how can I continue to grow what I'm doing and make myself relevant? So we do have a few minutes left. There are resources in this too when this is sent out. If you love to get into it more, go ahead and check these out. They're all the stuff that I talked about. So everything that I talked about is included there. And then we are going to open it up for a few minutes of Q&A. So we've got a few minutes left here. And I think Alyssa, who's helping me out, is going to jump in and we'll get a few questions answered too.
Thanks, Sam.
Hi.
Everyone, the Q&A is open, so if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in there. We have just a little over 5 minutes left.
There's already a question in here, which is fantastic. Thank you for that. First question was, could you elaborate on the difference between ELT and ETL? Yeah, absolutely. So ETL is extract, transform, and load. So the idea being that you take the data, you pull it from where it is, transform it to the structure that you want, and then load it into the place where you want it to go. So that way you can analyze it in a structured fashion. ELT is going to be extract, so pull the data, load it, get it into that source, and then transform it later. So if you think about it, it's really just modifying when we're actually doing those steps. So think of it like data lake versus data warehouse. Where in a data warehouse, you'd want to ETL first to get it into a data lake. We're extracting it, loading it in there, and then we'll transform it after the fact. And I got another question. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for asking. So I got a question. Do you have any suggestions or resources for conducting data information literacy assessments in your company or higher education institution? In my case, thanks. It's a great question. Man, there's a couple of different programs out there that do those or have certificates for them. I mean, you can find them with a quick Google. I don't have one that's a favorite necessarily. We've been creating a lot of resources to help people learn, but I think to your point, they don't have a piece at the end where you can go in and check people's knowledge of it. What I suggest though is spending time doing pulling together events where you're actually getting people using some of this knowledge. So, and I don't mean an event like this, like, I mean, like low key, something smaller where you're saying, okay, let's get together, these 5 of us, and let's go over a couple examples where we maybe pull up dashboards and explore them or analyze them. And the reason I say that is that a lot of times what happens is we get into the like accreditation or certification or something like that. And some people are better at testing than others, but it doesn't necessarily test our hands-on knowledge. So I would encourage more of that. I know from a job perspective, it is helpful to have letters behind your name or things like that. But I don't have a favorite on that front. I apologize. Can you talk a little bit about synthetic data and how we use it efficiently? That's a great question. To be honest, I have not heard that term yet, and I'm a little embarrassed to admit it, but I'll be honest, I haven't. So I would need to dig into it to know a little more. So I'll have to, that gives me something to go check out. So thank you for throwing that in there. Suggestions for creating a differentiated data literacy program internally for an organization after assessing the baseline, what tools, activities that are low cost we can start with. That's a great question. We actually have the guides that I mentioned on our webpage, which is in this deck, outline an entire plan for businesses or organizations to bring data literacy with stuff like that. And it's a free guide, and it talks about activities, and it outlines what we should do so that people can actually do that at scale. So I would definitely suggest taking a look at that. It's an awesome thing that we built, and it's it doesn't always get seen, so it's kind of lives behind the scenes, but it's so cool. How long did it take me to consider myself proficient using Tableau? Oh man, I think that one that's a good question. It comes down to frequency of use more so than years, if that makes sense. So when I used to train, I would run into people that maybe in my class, and they'd be like, yeah, I mean, I'm kind of an expert. I've been doing Tableau for the last 8 years. And I'd be like, oh, no way. How often do you use it? And they'd be like, well, like once or twice a year. It's like, okay. So like 16 times, you've been in Tableau 16 times. So I think, not to knock that, but I think it comes down to exposure. Like how often are you using it? And I think if you're using it regularly, I mean, honestly, a few months if you're using it all the time. And even then, it just comes down to, are you proficient enough to do what you need to do? The question is, would you say data literacy is more about teaching everyone to be more data literate rather than just keeping to data people? Absolutely. And I think, one of the big things of this too is if you think about your own value and your own, what you are, I guess, how valuable people see your knowledge, that only increases as people understand what you're doing. Think about, like, I'll get another story. Sorry. My drain plugged a little while back in my kitchen sink. And I'll be honest, I did not appreciate plumbers enough until I had to clean out, 25 foot of snake that was going through, grease and all this other gross stuff in there. And then after that, I was like, they're worth every penny. Like, that was disgusting. That was the hardest thing I've done in a long time. And I do a lot of stuff. So, I mean, it's not, yeah. So I think it helps raise your value at the same time. And it gets more people aware of what's happening. And the more we all know, the better we can be. Question, steps to learn Tableau and master it. I would say dig into the community and then get on a Tableau public. There's a ton of resources there that help teach people what to do. And I would encourage you that our forums and the community, the Data Fam, is the most supportive place I've ever been. And people are more willing to dive in and help with your problem than anything I've ever seen. So I would say first, Tableau public is a great place to go because it's free and it's the full Tableau desktop, except that you can't, the limitations being like, publishing to your own server or something like that. but it has resources and workbooks you can download from other people and the tool that you can use without any limit. So it's pretty amazing. I mean, there are like a couple limits like rows and stuff like that, but it's the full tool other than that. Let's see here. And there's a question about tracking infectious diseases and calculating time and motion. I don't have a great answer from like product specific stuff in that case, but I'm sure if you got onto our forums, there are probably a lot of people doing that would love to give you some specific help. Pros and cons for giving employees access to a sandbox to play around with data and make dashboards, and it not cost a ton for data storage. Yeah, that is a tough one. But I would say the pros to that is that for most people, abstract knowledge is not as helpful as applied knowledge. Like it won't stick. It's a lot like me talking about learning Spanish, where I learned enough Spanish to be fluent and multiple times, but because I never did it and never spoke with other people, it was not useful, right? And I don't, like even now I feel anxious, like when someone walks by that I've heard speaking Spanish before, I'm anxious about trying it. Even though I know the words, it just feels like I have this anxiety. So I think giving people the opportunity to get in play is huge. The big thing that I would say there, though, is they don't need to play around with a multi-billion row database to actually learn the tools and to learn these functions. And I see that all too often where people are like, oh, well, I need to test it out and see if it can do 10 billion rows. And I'm like, okay, not to learn the tool you don't, and not to learn data literacy you don't. So I would say smaller data sets, getting them in more frequently. And then also I would encourage you to give them an objective. Flailing around and just playing with stuff, most people won't learn much. But if you say, here's a data set, it's all about rescuing dogs, dig in and find out these metrics about rescuing dogs, they're going to be a lot more directed and they'll learn a lot more. In my career working with data, what is the one difficult challenge you've had to overcome? I think the biggest thing there, believe it or not, is people. And it is communication between people. So a lot of the stuff that we're talking about right now comes down to effective communication, asking a lot of questions, and being open and ready for things to not go the way you expected, and then being confident in the fact that you are able to pivot and understand and work with it anyways. And I think that's easier said than done, but that is definitely the thing that I've seen the most success with. I've been using Tableau for about 2 years for work now. However, I feel stuck in a rut about the dashboards I make. How would you suggest refueling creativity? Man, I know this sounds like a broken record, but Visit the Day from Tableau Public is great because people will do stuff that is just wild. Now, keep in mind, not all of it is visual best practice for communication. So when you see it, sometimes you see something that's really cool and you're like, oh, I want to do that. And you should just to learn it. But at the same time, recognize that like that's probably not the best way to communicate something, but it helps to kind of get the creative juices flowing to understand like what is possible in Tableau. And Visit the Day will give you a new viz in your inbox every day. And then you can go into Tableau Public and look at gallery in there. I think there's gallery if I'm not mistaken. And you can dig through the vizzes that way. So Alyssa, am I still okay? Or I think we might be at time, but.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more question.
Okay. Oh man. Okay. So it's, somebody said, could you please suggest some resources like use cases to practice and have a hands-on? These feel a little bit like they're a setup for me to say this, but there are some great community programs through Tableau. One of them is called Makeover Monday or Workout Wednesday. So again, Makeover Monday and Workout Wednesday. And it is literally a data set and a dashboard that you get to go in and fix or make better or just work on. So it's hands-on, it's directed, and then people share those on social media just to show what they've done. So I would definitely say that is one of the best places to get in there and learn it quick. And honestly, like, again, you don't need to be perfect right off the bat. Again, this is like my kid's story, right? My kids always want to be like the amazing star after the first time they do something. And I'm like, dude, it's going to not be that way up front. And that's okay. That's what learning is all about, right? I could keep going all day, Alyssa, but I don't want to push us too far if I need to stop here.
Yeah, we'll respect everyone's time. If we didn't get to the question.
Can I answer one more? Sorry.
Yeah.
Somebody said, looks like there's a few professors here. I'm looking for training materials for my students as well. I'm going to check the data skills page. Also look for Tableau academic programs. So Tableau for students and Tableau for teaching. and they have just a wealth of stuff there. I mean, like curriculum, like challenge, like all sorts of stuff. So check out those 2 things, and that should get you going.
Perfect. Thank you. If we didn't get to your question, we can follow up with you after. We were recording, so we will share the recording with you and slides and all of Sam's great resources that he mentioned. And we hope to see you at a future event. Sam, I don't know if you have any closing words.
I mean, thank you again for spending your time here. I think that to me always blows me away because I know how hard it is to pull away from your regular work. So thank you. Appreciate it. Hope you guys have a great day, and hope to see you on future ones of these because there will be more.